Darren Klein, Marissa Klein, and Victor Klein seemed like just another suburban family. But behind closed doors, Darren's obsession with online fame twisted into a deadly plan that would shatter their quiet home and horrifically backfire in ways he never imagined. Darren Klein had always been the quiet kid in his suburban neighborhood, but his silence wasn't the kind that came with peace. It was the heavy silence of obsession, one that grew thicker every day inside his dimly lit bedroom. Posters of famous influencers and internet personalities hung on his walls, each face a reminder of what he didn't have: followers, fame, and validation. His parents, Marissa and Victor Klein, thought he was just a typical teenager glued to his phone, scrolling through endless videos and playing games. But Darren's fixation was far darker. He wanted to be remembered, not as an ordinary student but as someone who shook the world. His craving for attention wasn't about fun or connection. It was about legacy, twisted into something dangerous. At school, Darren was nearly invisible. Teachers described him as distracted, classmates found him strange, and the only time anyone paid attention was when Elena Voss, a popular girl in his class, posted her latest video. Elena wasn't just another content creator, she was everything Darren wished to be. Her follower count grew steadily, her videos filled with laughing friends and glowing comments. Every time he saw her numbers rise, Darren felt a mixture of rage and envy. He believed he was smarter, more creative, and more daring, yet nobody noticed him. To him, the internet wasn't just a place for entertainment, it was the only place where people mattered, and he refused to remain a ghost in its endless crowd. Nights became his planning ground. With the curtains drawn, Darren watched videos of young people pulling off extreme stunts that made them go viral. Some vandalized property, others fought in public, and a few even hinted at crimes. The more shocking the act, the bigger the reaction. Darren studied these clips like a scientist, noting every detail: the way the camera moved, how the captions were worded, and the timing of the uploads. He didn't want to copy them, he wanted to outdo them. To him, ordinary pranks weren't enough. He needed something unforgettable, something that would make people fear and admire him at the same time. His parents noticed his change but misunderstood its depth. Marissa, gentle and patient, tried to connect with him by asking about his interests. Victor, a man of discipline who spent his days fixing engines at the local garage, scolded him for wasting time. Neither of them could see how far Darren's mind had already drifted. He felt suffocated under their watch, believing they stood between him and the legend he was destined to become. The more they tried to guide him, the more he saw them as barriers. Their love felt like control, and their concern sounded like criticism. In Darren's twisted vision, they weren't his protectors anymore. They were the villains keeping him from greatness. By day, Darren blended into the monotony of suburban life, but by night he transformed into someone else entirely. He created secret accounts, hidden from his parents and classmates, where he posted cryptic messages hinting at something monumental. Soon, he wrote under one post, attaching a blurry image of a kitchen knife lying on a countertop. Another post showed a shadow on his wall, with the caption, "Every legend starts with sacrifice." The handful of anonymous followers he gathered encouraged him with likes and short comments, unaware of how serious he was. Each notification was like fuel to his growing fire. The line between fantasy and reality blurred. Darren began rehearsing in front of his phone's camera, practicing his facial expressions, fearless, cold, detached. He wanted to look like a character in a thriller movie, someone larger than life. He imagined the headlines, the interviews, the documentaries that would immortalize his name. In those moments, he didn't see himself as a teenager. He saw himself as an icon waiting to be born through destruction. Outside his room, life carried on as normal. Marissa prepared dinners, Victor tinkered with car parts in the garage, neighbors watered their lawns under the soft hum of suburban quiet, but inside Darren's mind, a storm brewed with every passing day. His obsession wasn't just an escape anymore. It had become a mission, a belief that his destiny lay not in school achievements or ordinary milestones, but in something dark and irreversible. Each hour he spent alone convinced him further to be remembered. He would have to cross a line no one could come back from. Darren's plan did not emerge in a single moment of madness. It was built slowly, like a puzzle, each piece falling into place over weeks of restless nights. His room became a workshop of secrets. On his desk, scattered between school books he no longer opened, were sheets of paper filled with sketches and notes. He drew floor plans of his house, circled windows, and wrote down times when his parents were most vulnerable. He studied their routines with the precision of a stalker, observing what time Marissa usually retreated to bed with her books, and when Victor shut off the garage lights. Every habit, every detail became another opportunity in his mind. The more he wrote, the more he convinced himself that this was destiny. Darren wasn't planning a crime in his eyes. He was scripting the first episode of his legendary life. He thought of it like a show, where suspense, timing, and shock mattered above all else. His parents weren't people anymore. They were characters in his twisted narrative, props in a production that would catapult him into online history. He began experimenting with the tools he would use. From the garage, he borrowed items under the guise of helping his father. A hammer, a wrench, even a roll of duct tape. Late at night, he set them on the floor and tested how they would look under his phone's camera. He adjusted the angles, turned lights on and off, and recorded short clips. He would replay them again and again, analyzing the effect, like a director fine-tuning his scene. His fascination was not with violence itself, but with the image of violence, the way it would appear to strangers on the other side of a screen. The hidden account he had created became more active. He began posting countdown-style hints, a shadow of his hand gripping the hammer, a photograph of his front yard in the dark, captioned with a single word, soon. His small audience was intrigued, throwing out comments that ranged from amused to disturbed. Most thought it was some kind of prank or horror roleplay, but Darren didn't see it that way. To him, these posts were the teasers before the premiere, building suspense for the event that would define his existence. At school, Darren appeared more detached than ever. He walked the halls with a strange confidence, as if he carried a secret that made him superior to everyone else. He stopped caring about assignments and ignored his teacher's concerns. Elena Voss continued to post her cheerful, colorful content, and Darren followed her page obsessively, watching her numbers grow. He told himself that when his masterpiece went live, her videos would be forgotten. No one would care about makeup tutorials or friendly dances when the internet had something darker, something unforgettable. Back at home, his parents were unaware of the storm gathering under their roof. Marissa thought her son's strange behavior came from stress or loneliness. She tried to bring him small comforts, sliding snacks under his door, or asking if he wanted to watch movies together. Victor grew more frustrated, lecturing Darren about responsibility, hard work, and the value of discipline. To Darren, these gestures only hardened his resolve. He no longer saw their actions as care, but as interference. Every scolding word from Victor was another push toward the line he was about to cross. Every attempt at kindness from Marissa was reimagined as weakness, that made his mission even more necessary. Darren began timing his steps around the house, rehearsing movements in silence. He would walk from his room to the kitchen, then back again, calculating how quickly he could move, how softly the floor creaked, how he could remain unseen. He tried different hiding spots for his phone, propping it against bookshelves, or angling it from corners to capture the most chilling perspective. These recordings were not meant for him alone. They were for an audience he imagined waiting, craving, demanding to be shot. At night, when the house was silent, Darren whispered to himself that legends required sacrifice. He believed he had been chosen by the digital world to become its next icon. His parents were no longer Marissa and Victor Klein. In his warped imagination, they had become the final barrier between obscurity and immortality. As his plan solidified, Darren no longer felt fear. Instead, he felt exhilaration, a sick thrill that his life was no longer ordinary. Soon, he told himself, the story would begin, and his name would echo far beyond the quiet streets of his suburban neighborhood. The night Darren had been waiting for arrived cloaked in a stillness that seemed almost unnatural. The suburban street outside was quiet, houses lined neatly under the glow of street lamps, but inside the Klein home, tension hummed beneath the surface. Darren moved through the evening like a performer waiting for his cue, his mind rehearsing every step, every angle, every outcome. He had prepared for weeks, but nothing felt more real than this moment, when everything he had imagined would finally come alive. His parents followed their usual routines, unaware of the storm building within their son. Marissa lingered in the living room with a book, her glasses slipping slightly as she lost herself in its pages. Victor finished tinkering in the garage before locking up for the night, his heavy footsteps moving across the hallway as he prepared for bed. These ordinary movements, so familiar and comforting, looked entirely different through Darren's eyes. To him, they were part of a script, pieces of a scene that needed to unfold perfectly. He watched from the shadows, his phone hidden nearby, recording fragments of the night, like a filmmaker setting up the climax of a movie. Every sound became amplified, the turning of a page, the creak of the stairs, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Darren's pulse matched the rhythm of these sounds, as he paced silently in his room, gripping the handle of the hammer he had taken earlier. He set up his phone at an angle near the hallway, ensuring the lens caught the dim glow of the lamp and the shadow of his father passing by. He checked the recording twice, replaying the clip to confirm the frame was right. It wasn't just about the act. It was about how the act looked, how it would play out for the faceless audience he believed waited for him. He waited until the house grew quieter, the television shut off, and Marissa headed upstairs. The first part of his plan demanded silence. He walked through the house with careful precision, every step rehearsed, his body tense but steady. His mother's shadow crossed the crack of her bedroom door, and for a brief second, Darren's chest tightened, but not with regret. It was anticipation, the rush of a secret about to burst into reality. When he struck, the house absorbed the violence with chilling indifference. Victor was the first target, caught by surprise before he could react. The garage tools he loved so much lay scattered as Darren's weapon came down with deliberate force. The room filled with the chaos of movement, yet Darren felt detached, as if he were outside his body watching it happen. He did not hear his father's struggle as a cry for help, but as background noise, a soundtrack to his performance. Marissa's end followed swiftly, her confusion lasting only seconds before silence returned to the house. Darren's breaths came heavy, filling the emptiness. He paused, standing still in the aftermath, not as a son grieving, but as a creator admiring the completion of his work. To him, the house no longer looked like the place he had grown up in. It was now a stage, its walls holding the memory of the show he believed would make him unforgettable. He moved quickly, staging the scene as if setting up for a photograph. Lamps were tilted to cast dramatic shadows. Objects were placed deliberately to suggest disorder, but with a strange kind of artistry. His phone captured it all, the angles of the bodies, the glint of metal tools, the eerie calm of a home turned into a nightmare. Darren replayed the footage, nodding with satisfaction at the chilling visuals. Without hesitation, he uploaded snippets to his secret account. A blurred shot of the hallway, a streak of red across the floor, a caption that read, "This is only the beginning." He refreshed the page, waiting for reactions, his heart pounding with excitement rather than fear. For a moment, he believed he had achieved what he wanted, the transformation of his ordinary life into something extraordinary. But outside the digital world, reality loomed. The house smelled of iron and silence, and the weight of what he had done clung to every corner. Neighbors, oblivious for now, carried on their evening routines, unaware of the horror just a few feet away. Darren ignored that truth, focusing instead on the screen in his hand. In his mind, the story had just begun, but what he failed to see was that his performance had already left a trail too obvious, too incriminating, for him to ever escape. Morning came with the kind of quiet that usually meant nothing unusual was happening in the neighborhood. Cars backed out of driveways, sprinklers hissed against lawns, and birds settled on rooftops. But the Klein house remained unnervingly still. Victor never showed up to his shift at the garage, which was unlike him. When calls from coworkers went unanswered, a neighbor who had noticed the strange silence around the house made the decision to contact authorities for a welfare check. That call would unravel Darren's carefully constructed fantasy. Detective Rowan Hale arrived at the scene with his team just after noon.
Hale had built his career on noticing small details others overlooked, and as he approached the front door, he immediately sensed something was wrong. There were no signs of forced entry. The curtains were drawn tight, giving the house a suffocating appearance. When officers entered, the smell of blood hit instantly, heavy and metallic, clinging to the air. The once tidy home had transformed into a nightmare, and at its center were the bodies of Marissa and Victor Clout. Darren played his part poorly. He pretended to stumble into the scene as though discovering it with the officers, but his performance lacked the raw confusion and grief Hale had seen in others. Instead of shock, Darren's eyes darted to the devices in the room, almost as if he were more concerned with what was being recorded than with what had just been found. Hale noticed this flicker of behavior, and mentally stored it away. As the investigation unfolded, odd details surfaced immediately. The placement of objects around the crime scene seemed unnatural, almost theatrical. A lamp tilted at a dramatic angle, tools arranged in ways that looked intentional rather than chaotic. Hale crouched near a corner of the living room, and noticed something that stood out even more: a phone positioned as though it had been recording. It was powered off, but faint traces of fingerprints across its surface hinted it had been moved frequently. The forensics team began collecting evidence while Hale observed Darren carefully. The teenager sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact, his hands clenched around his own phone. Hale asked routine questions about the night before, and Darren's answers felt rehearsed, as if he were reciting lines. He spoke about being asleep, about waking up to noise, but his story wavered in consistency. When Hale asked about the scratches on Darren's wrist, the boy muttered something about bumping into furniture, though his voice cracked slightly, betraying the confidence he tried to project. Back at the station, investigators searched for digital footprints. What they uncovered was more disturbing than the crime itself. Darren's hidden account surfaced quickly once they traced unusual activity connected to his IP address. On it were the cryptic posts he had been making for weeks, images of shadows, captions about sacrifice, and the chilling videos uploaded just hours after his parents were killed. The timestamps lined up too perfectly to be coincident. One of Darren's classmates, Elena Voss, unexpectedly became part of the puzzle. She had stumbled across the disturbing clips shared anonymously online, and immediately flagged them to a teacher, who passed them to police. Elena's recognition of the background, a hallway she had once seen during a school project at Darren's house, became a critical link. What Darren believed would spark admiration had instead become the very breadcrumb trail that exposed him. Hale pieced the evidence together with calm precision. The staged lighting, the unusual object placement, the obsession with his phone, and now the undeniable digital trail. It all pointed back to Darren. The boy's hunger for clout had blinded him to the fact that every move he made left behind proof of guilt. Hale saw not a criminal mastermind, but a teenager whose fantasy of fame had collided with reality in the most destructive way. When officers returned to the Klein home to retrieve more evidence, they discovered Darren's notebooks, tucked away in his desk. Inside were sketches of the house, plans for timing, and disturbing entries describing how he envisioned the world reacting to his masterpiece. Phrases like "the internet will remember me forever," and "every legend starts with blood" filled the margin. These words painted a chilling picture of a boy who had turned his obsession with attention into motive. The more the evidence stacked up, the clearer it became that Darren had not only committed the murders, but had documented them with the intention of broadcasting his action. His supposed genius in staging the perfect crime had unraveled into a trail so obvious even the smallest details pointed to his guilt. Hale knew it was only a matter of time before the net closed in completely. The only question left was whether Darren understood that his story was no longer one of rising fame, but of catastrophic downfall. Darren's downfall began the moment Detective Rowan Hale returned with a warrant. The suburban house that Darren once treated like a stage became a cage as officers moved swiftly through its rooms, seizing devices, notebooks, and every scrap of evidence that told the story Darren had so carefully crafted. He had imagined applause, endless streams of comments, and his name trending worldwide. What he received instead were stern voices, reading him his rights, the cold snap of handcuffs around his wrists, and the flashing red and blue lights of police cars cutting across the quiet street. Neighbors watched from their porches in shock, whispering to one another as Darren was led away. The attention he had craved finally arrived, but not in the way he had ever wanted. Inside the interrogation room, Darren tried to hold on to his fantasy. He sat straight, his expression hardened into the mask he had practiced countless times in front of his camera. He believed he could control the narrative, that he could spin the story into something larger than himself, perhaps even inspire sympathy or fascination. But Detective Hale dismantled that illusion piece by piece. Every clip from Darren's secret account was played back. Every sketch and note from his journals was laid out in front of him. The evidence wasn't just overwhelming, it was undeniable. What Darren thought was artistic, what he believed would be iconic, now looked monstrous under the harsh fluorescent lights of the station. When the news broke, it spread quickly, but the reaction wasn't what Darren had pictured in his fantasy. Headlines described him not as a legend, but as a killer, a teenager who had betrayed his own parents for the shallow pursuit of internet clout. Online forums lit up, but instead of admiration, Darren's name was followed by disgust, outrage, and ridicule. He was mocked as foolish, condemned as heartless, and remembered not for brilliance, but for stupidity. Even Elena Voss, the rival whose popularity had fueled his obsession, posted a heartfelt message, mourning Marissa and Victor while condemning Darren's action. The gap between the legacy he wanted, and the reality he created, could not have been wider. In court, the case unfolded with grim clarity. Prosecutors presented Darren's videos as evidence, the shaky footage of his parents' final moments, becoming the most damning piece of all. The jury didn't see an ambitious creator, or misunderstood genius. They saw a boy who had traded love and family for a hollow dream. His lawyers tried to argue immaturity, poor judgment, and mental instability, but none of it erased the chilling calculation behind his action. Witnesses described Marissa's kindness, Victor's dedication, and how both had worked tirelessly to support their son. Their deaths weren't just tragic, they were senseless, born out of a craving for attention that turned deadly. Darren sat through the trial in silence, but beneath his blank expression lay the crumbling of his imagined future. He had pictured interviews, documentaries, endless discussion of his legendary act. Instead, every word spoken about him was drenched in condemnation. Former classmates described him as strange, neighbors recalled his withdrawn demeanor, and experts depicted his obsession with the internet as a cautionary tale. He wasn't becoming a cultural phenomenon, he was becoming a warning. The sentence, when it came, was heavy and final. Darren was found guilty of double homicide, and sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read, and Darren's mask finally cracked. For the first time, the weight of his choices settled. He had destroyed everything, his family, his freedom, and even the twisted vision of fame he once clung to. His story was over, before it had ever truly begun. Life inside prison stripped Darren of whatever illusions he still carried. The notoriety he once dreamed of turned into humiliation. Other inmates mocked him, laughing at his failed attempt to become famous. Guards treated him with cold indifference. Outside, the world moved on, his name fading from headlines, remembered only as part of a grim story that parents told their children as a warning. Marissa and Victor were mourned by the community, their kindness remembered in memorials, while Darren's memory was locked away behind concrete walls and steel bars. In the end, Darren Klein did achieve what he set out for. People remembered him, but not as a legend, not as a star, not as someone who broke the internet. He was remembered as the teenager who murdered the very people who loved him most, all for the hollow glow of a screen. His legacy became a curse, a reminder of how far obsession can drive someone, and how chasing clout can end not in fame, but in horror and ruin.